I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like, until I saw the message that shattered my world. What came next was a whirlwind of betrayal, anger, and unexpected choices that changed everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. It started like any other family gathering, but something felt off. It was Lily's birthday, a sweet little celebration in our backyard. She had just turned 5, and the air was filled with the sound of children laughing and the sight of colorful balloons swaying in the breeze. We had one of those extravagant cakes with bright, oversized candles that Lily adored. Meanwhile, Oliver, our 7-year-old, was darting around like he was fueled by pure sugar. The sun was shining, the weather was perfect, everything should have been just right. But it wasn't. My wife, Emma, seemed distracted. You know that gut feeling you get when something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it. That was me the entire day. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure if you're about to tumble into a free fall or if the danger exists only in your mind. I couldn't shake the sense that something was brewing beneath the surface, just out of reach. Emma spent much of the party talking to Dave, one of her colleagues from her marketing job. Now, Emma has always had a lot of male friends, and I've never been the jealous type. But that day, during Lily's birthday celebration, I noticed something I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just casual conversation between co-workers, it was the way they looked at each other. Those fleeting glances that carried weight, the kind that says more than words ever could. It was subtle, but I saw it. I've always noticed these things. I tried to reason with myself, brushing it off as overthinking. Maybe they were just sharing a funny inside joke from work, or maybe they were closer friends than I realized. But something about the way Emma's posture shifted when Dave was nearby made my stomach churn. Her smile lingered a second too long, her laugh sounded too easy. All through the day, the unease gnawed at me, whispering doubts I didn't want to acknowledge. I couldn't stop watching them. Emma was smiling, but it wasn't the smile she reserved for me. It was softer, more intimate, like it belonged to someone else. And the worst part? Dave wasn't just chatting innocently. He had this way of leaning in just a little too close, his body language erasing the casual boundary of a coworker. His eyes lingered on her lips as she spoke, as though he wasn't just listening, but drinking her in. I kept telling myself, "You're being ridiculous, James. Don't overthink this." But no matter how hard I tried, the doubt wouldn't leave me alone. After everyone had left and the kids were tucked in bed, I sat down with a beer, hoping to shake off the uneasy feeling. But it clung to me, a weight pressing down on my chest. My mind kept replaying those looks, the way her laugh had seemed too natural, too easy around him. Before I even realized what I was doing, I grabbed her phone from the counter. It wasn't something I'd ever done before. I'd always trusted Emma. Or at least, I thought I had. The moment I unlocked her phone, my stomach dropped. Right there, in her messages, was a text from Dave. "Last night was fun. We should do it again soon." Winking face. My heart froze. Then it started pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. You know that feeling, like the air has been sucked out of the room, your chest tightens, and for a moment, you convince yourself you've misunderstood? That was me. I stared at that text, hoping, praying that there was some kind of innocent explanation. But deep down, I already knew. I must have looked at that message for a solid minute before the rage started building. It wasn't just anger, it was a raw, visceral hurt that made my hands shake. I stormed into the kitchen where Emma was standing, casually wiping down the counter as if she hadn't just turned our world upside down. "Who the hell is Dave?" I demanded, holding up her phone. My voice came out harsher than I'd intended, laced with a fury I couldn't contain. Emma froze. For a split second, her face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. But then, almost like flipping a switch, she regained her composure, her expression turning cold and defensive. "What the hell, James?" she shot back, her voice sharp and accusing. "You're going through my phone now?" She didn't deny it. She didn't even bother to explain. Instead, she tried to turn it around on me, like I was the one in the wrong for looking. I was the crazy one, or at least, that's how Emma wanted me to feel. She started gaslighting me, like she always did when our arguments got serious. "It's nothing, James. You're being paranoid," she snapped. "Dave and I are just friends. I can't believe you're doing this, especially at Lily's birthday, of all times." But I wasn't buying it. "Not this time. Just friends don't send texts like this," I shot back, holding her phone up. "What the hell does 'last night was fun' mean, Emma?" We stood there in the kitchen, glaring at each other, the tension so thick it felt suffocating. I couldn't believe she was twisting the situation to make it seem like I was the one in the wrong, for finding out. My mind was spinning, dragging up every suspicious moment I'd ignored over the years. Every late-night work event, every unexplained dinner, every time she brushed me off with a vague answer when I'd asked about her day. "You're imagining things, James. Stop being so insecure," she said, her voice cold and dismissive. But her eyes betrayed her. There was something there, fear, maybe guilt. It was just a flicker, but it was enough to tell me I wasn't imagining this. No, I wasn't paranoid. She was lying to me, and we both knew it. Still, I felt trapped. The more I replayed everything in my head, the heavier it all felt. I knew I needed to talk to someone, to sort through the mess in my mind before it consumed me. That's when I thought of Sarah. Sarah and I had been friends since childhood, long before Emma had ever entered my life. If there was anyone who could help me make sense of this, it was her. I didn't give her all the details over the phone, just told her that I needed to talk. She didn't ask questions, just said, "I'll be right there." And within an hour, she was at the house. At first, it felt strange pouring everything out to her. I wasn't used to airing my problems, especially something as personal as this. But Sarah just listened, the way she always had. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix anything, she just let me speak until I had nothing left to say. When I finally told her about the text from Dave, her expression hardened. "James," she said quietly, her voice steady but firm, "you're not imagining this. That's not a message you send to a friend." Sarah didn't flinch. She gave me this look, one that sent a chill through me. It was the kind of look that said she understood more than she was letting on. "James," she said, leaning forward slightly, her tone calm but serious, "I've seen this kind of thing before. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is." Her words hit me like a brick wall. It was a strange kind of relief, knowing I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. Emma was hiding something, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into thinking otherwise. Not this time. Sarah, ever the practical one, didn't just offer comfort, she offered a plan. "We'll figure out what she's up to," she said firmly. "Keep an eye on her. See what she's doing when she's not at home." I hesitated. It felt wrong, almost invasive, but at that point, what choice did I have? Emma had already torn apart my trust. I needed answers, real ones, not her half-baked excuses or the guilt trip she was trying to lay on me. The situation was spiraling out of control, and I was barely hanging on. I had to know the truth, even if it hurt. Sarah and I didn't waste any time. After our conversation, I felt like a man on the edge, driven by the need for clarity. She laid out a simple plan: follow Emma discreetly, but be smart about it. "Emma isn't stupid," Sarah warned. "If she catches on, she'll twist this against you." I knew she was right. Emma was already trying to paint me as paranoid, I couldn't afford to hand her more ammunition. And that's how we ended up where we were, two grown adults, sitting in my car, parked across the street from Emma's office late one night. It felt surreal, like we were starring in some low-stakes crime drama. Sarah sat beside me, her sharp eyes glued to the building's entrance. I, on the other hand, couldn't stop tapping my fingers on the steering wheel, my nerves stretched tight as a wire. "Relax," Sarah muttered, her tone laced with calm authority. "We're just watching. Nothing else." But relaxing was the last thing I could do. The weight of what we might find, what I was almost certain we'd find, pressed heavily on my chest. This wasn't just about Emma's behavior anymore, it was about proving to myself that I wasn't losing my grip on reality. I didn't argue. We followed them, keeping a safe distance to avoid drawing attention. They ended up at this small, upscale restaurant, the kind of place with low, romantic lighting, candles flickering on every table, and oversized wine glasses that seemed more for show than practicality. The intimacy of it all hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a dinner. It was them, together. I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Inside, I watched as Dave pulled out a chair for Emma. She smiled at him, and it wasn't just any smile, it was the smile. The one she used to give me, back when I was her whole world. Now, it felt like I was witnessing the quiet destruction of everything I thought we had. "They're comfortable," Sarah said quietly beside me, as if reading my mind. Her voice was steady, but there was a sadness to it, a kind of understanding. It wasn't new to her. We stayed parked there for what felt like hours, watching as they ordered food, drank wine, and laughed like two people without a care in the world. It was like they were in their own bubble, completely oblivious to the chaos brewing just outside. My chest tightened with every passing second, anger building like a wildfire. It wasn't just jealousy, it was rage, pure and unfiltered. The kind of rage that ignites in your chest and threatens to consume you. "I can't do this anymore," I finally said, breaking the silence. My voice was sharp, trembling with frustration and pain. "I need to confront her." Sarah nodded slowly, her face tense. "Are you sure? You need to be ready for whatever you're about to walk into." Her hesitation wasn't lost on me, but I was past the point of second-guessing. Watching Emma so at ease, like she wasn't ripping apart our life with every stolen glance and smile, was unbearable. It was like I didn't even matter to her anymore, like she'd already moved on. When Emma finally got home that night, I was waiting for her. My anger hadn't faded, it had simmered, low and steady, sharpening every word I was about to say. She walked in, her heels clicking softly on the floor, looking down at her phone like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Where were you tonight?" I asked, my tone cutting through the silence. There was no point in pretending I wasn't upset, every edge of my voice carried the weight of betrayal. Emma stopped mid-step, looking up from her phone. Her expression shifted, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Out with friends," she said casually, her voice laced with annoyance. "What's with the interrogation?" That dismissive tone, that casual way she tried to brush me off, was like pouring gasoline on a fire. The anger boiled up inside me, but this time, I wasn't going to let her twist the narrative. "Cut, Emma," I said sharply. "I followed you. I saw you with Dave." Her face changed in an instant. That confident, dismissive expression crumbled, replaced by something I couldn't quite place, shock, fear, maybe even defiance. For a moment, she didn't say a word, but when she did, her voice was cold and detached. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms like she was bracing herself for what was coming. "Yes, I've been spending time with Dave. But it's not what you think. We're not, it's not physical. It's just," she paused, her voice faltering slightly before she pushed on. "I've been lonely, James. You've been so wrapped up in work, in the kids, in everything but me. It was just an emotional thing. It wasn't supposed to go this far." Her words hit me like a freight train. An emotional affair. She said it like that made it better, like it was somehow less of a betrayal because they hadn't gone all the way. But to me, it didn't matter. The trust, the connection we'd built, it was all shattered. "What the hell does that even mean, Emma?" I snapped. It wasn't supposed to go this far. So what, I'm supposed to just accept this? That opened the floodgates. The conversation spiraled into a toxic back and forth of accusations and blame. I called her every name I could think of, my words sharp and unfiltered, and she threw her own barbs right back at me. She accused me of neglecting her, of not being the husband she needed. "It's always about you, isn't it?" she shouted. "You think you're so perfect, but you've been checked out for years, James. You don't even see me anymore." Her words stung, but I couldn't let them go unanswered. It was brutal, raw, ugly, and full of resentment. By the time it was over, we were both left hollow, like the fight had drained everything out of us. Emma stormed off to bed without another word, slamming the door behind her. I crashed on the couch that night, unable to sleep. My mind was racing, replaying every word, every accusation. Was I really to blame? Had I let her slip away? Or was this just her way of justifying the choices she made? The questions gnawed at me, but they had no answers. And in the midst of all that chaos, there was Sarah. She stayed, even though I hadn't asked her to. She sat with me on the couch, quietly at first, and then we started talking. We talked for hours, about Emma, about everything that had been building up inside me. It was the kind of conversation I hadn't had with anyone in years. But there was something unspoken between us, something we didn't dare name. It was subtle, yet undeniable. Neither of us addressed it, but it hung in the air, a quiet tension that wasn't going away. After the blowout with Emma, the house grew quiet. Too quiet. We were still living under the same roof, going through the motions for the kids, but it was like walking on a minefield. Every conversation felt like a potential explosion, every glance was heavy with resentment. The days stretched on, and the silence between us became deafening. The life we had built together felt like it was ticking toward an inevitable end, and I didn't know if we could survive it, or if I even wanted us to. I knew Emma was still seeing Dave, and she knew I knew. But neither of us was willing to make the first move to end things, not yet. It was like we were trapped in this silent, passive-aggressive standoff, both waiting for the other to shatter what little remained of our life together. That's when Sarah came up with an idea. It was late one evening, and I was venting to her again, feeling like I might as well be invisible in my own house. "She's already checked out," I muttered bitterly. "I might as well be a ghost." A slow smile crept across Sarah's face. For a second, I couldn't tell if she was joking or dead serious. "Make her jealous," she said, leaning forward slightly. "Show her that you can move on, too." I blinked at her, unsure of what to say. "And how, exactly, am I supposed to do that?" I asked, frowning. "I'm not the one sneaking around with a coworker." "That's where I come in," Sarah replied, her voice low and full of mischief. "We'll stage it. Something public, somewhere she can't ignore it." Her eyes sparkled with an idea already taking shape. The opportunity presented itself almost immediately. Emma and I were expected to attend a gala together, one of those fancy events where everyone pretended their lives were perfect. It was a night full of glittering gowns, tailored suits, and champagne flutes raised under crystal chandeliers. Emma and I had planned to go, playing the happy couple for appearance's sake, but Sarah had another plan entirely. "That's where we'll do it," Sarah said, her voice gaining momentum as she worked out the details. "We'll show up together, flirting, laughing, looking like we're having the time of our lives. Let her watch us. I bet she won't be able to handle it." It was risky, and I knew it. But at that point, what did I have to lose? My marriage was already hanging by a thread, and the idea of turning the tables on Emma, of making her feel even a fraction of the humiliation I'd been carrying, was too tempting to ignore. The night of the gala arrived faster than I expected. The venue was packed with people dressed to the nines, their polished appearances masking whatever chaos lingered in their private lives. Sarah walked beside me, radiant in a deep red gown that turned more than a few heads as we entered. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride as she looped her arm through mine, her confidence infectious. It didn't take long to spot Emma. She was standing near the bar, dressed in a sleek black gown, her hair styled the way she always wore it when she wanted to make an impression. And she had. She looked stunning, but the sight of her didn't fill me with the warmth it used to. Instead, it was like a punch to the gut. And then I saw Dave. He was right beside her, leaning in as he spoke, his smarmy grin making my blood boil. They looked too comfortable together, too at ease, like they belonged in each other's orbit. The anger that I thought I'd pushed down came rushing back, but Sarah's steady hand on my arm brought me back to the plan. "Showtime," she whispered with a sly smile. We made our way across the room, deliberately weaving through the crowd in full view of Emma and Dave. Sarah laughed at something I said, a light, playful sound that carried just enough to turn heads, including Emma's. For a brief moment, her gaze met mine. Her smile faltered ever so slightly, and something flashed across her face: confusion? Annoyance? I couldn't tell, but it was enough to keep me going. Sarah leaned closer, her hand brushing my shoulder as she whispered something into my ear. It was all for show, but it felt natural, like we'd done this 100 times. I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in what felt like years. The whole act wasn't just for Emma, it was for me, too. A reminder that I didn't have to be defined by her betrayal. From the corner of my eye, I saw Emma stiffen. Her smile returned, but it was tight, forced. And Dave? He looked oblivious, too busy talking to notice the tension radiating off her. It was working. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't just reacting to her choices, I was reclaiming some semblance of control. But even as the plan unfolded, I couldn't help but wonder, what would come next? Was this the beginning of the end, or just another battle in a war that neither of us wanted to fight anymore? Seeing Dave there was enough to make my blood boil, but I kept my cool. Sarah appeared at my side, looking absolutely breathtaking in a deep red dress that hugged her in all the right places. She exuded confidence, and her presence was enough to steady me. I glanced across the room and caught Emma's eye. She noticed us immediately. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she turned back to Dave, trying to play it cool. But it was too late, the seed had been planted. As the night went on, I made sure our actions were more noticeable. Sarah and I danced together, her body pressed close to mine as the music swirled around us. I could feel the tension thickening in the air, a palpable force that made every glance from Emma burn hotter. From the corner of my eye, I saw her standing off to the side, watching us with a tight expression, her facade cracking with every passing minute. It was working. By the end of the night, I saw the unmistakable look of jealousy etched across her face. Her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing, and I knew we had struck a nerve. "That worked," I said under my breath, a small grin creeping across my lips. Sarah chuckled softly beside me, her eyes glinting with amusement. "Oh," she was livid, she said, leaning in slightly. "Did you see her face when we were dancing?" We stepped outside into the cool night air, a welcome relief from the heat and tension of the gala. The crisp breeze wrapped around us, but it wasn't enough to cool the fire simmering between us. The tension that had been building for weeks, unspoken, undeniable, finally came to a head. Without thinking, I pulled Sarah closer. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and then our lips collided in a heated kiss. It was intense, raw, and charged with everything we'd been holding back. In that instant, it wasn't about Emma, Dave, or even the plan. It was about us, about the undeniable connection we'd been trying to ignore. One thing led to another, and before I realized what was happening, we ended up in each other's arms in a way I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't calculated, and it wasn't part of some elaborate revenge. It was something deeper, something neither of us had prepared for. But as I held Sarah close, the weight of what had just happened began to settle in my stomach like a stone. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was something else entirely, and it had taken us both by surprise. Things had gotten complicated, far more complicated than I'd ever planned for. "I didn't plan for this to happen," I said finally, breaking the silence. Sarah turned to me, her lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. "Neither did I," she said softly. "But I guess things never go according to plan, do they?" She was right, nothing was going according to plan anymore. What started as an attempt to make Emma jealous had spiraled into something far messier and much more personal. I hadn't expected Emma to react so quickly, but deep down, should have known better. The morning after the gala, I could feel the tension even before Emma said a word. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, her back to me as she poured herself a cup of coffee. The air between us was charged, heavy with unspoken accusations. She didn't waste any time. "So, last night," she began, turning to face me. Her eyes were sharp, her tone cutting. "You think I didn't notice you flirting with Sarah in front of everyone?" I set my coffee cup down slowly, my pulse quickening. I knew where this was going, and frankly, I was tired of her games. "So what if I was?" I said evenly, my voice calm but firm. "What about you and Dave? You think I don't know what's been going on between you two?" That hit the mark. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely caught off guard. But Emma was never one to stay down for long. Her expression hardened, and her voice turned sharp. "Don't turn this around on me," she snapped. "You've been acting," she hesitated, searching for the right words, but she didn't have her usual quick comeback. "You've been acting like a complete stranger," she finally spat, her voice tinged with frustration and defensiveness. But she didn't try to twist my words this time. She didn't launch into another round of accusations. She just stood there, her breathing unsteady, like I'd knocked the wind out of her. "That's different," she said eventually, her voice quieter now, but trembling with anger. "Dave and it wasn't like that." "Don't lie to me," I shot back, my voice rising as my patience snapped. "You've been sneaking around for weeks, and now you're trying to act like I'm the bad guy because I danced with Sarah. You've been cheating on me, Emma. Don't you get that?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if it was guilt, anger, or some mixture of the two. I wanted to believe it was regret, that she was finally seeing the damage she'd done. But there was a part of me that wasn't sure. A part of me that wondered if she'd twist this, too, try to make me feel like I was the one at fault for calling her out. "You're just trying to make me look crazy," I added, my voice trembling with the weight of everything I was carrying. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and unresolved. I wasn't going to let her twist things around this time. The damage was already done, and there was no coming back from it. Things at home spiraled quickly after that argument. The silence, the forced smiles, the tension, it seeped into everything. It wasn't long before Oliver and Lily began to pick up on it. Kids are perceptive like that. No matter how much I tried to shield them, they could see that their parents weren't okay. One night, after another argument with Emma, this one quieter but no less venomous, I stepped out into the hallway and found Oliver standing there. His little face was scrunched with confusion and worry. "Dad, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice so soft it broke my heart. I forced a smile, the kind you put on when you're trying to convince someone of a lie. "Of course, buddy. Everything's fine," I said. But it wasn't fine. It was far from fine, and I hated that he and Lily were getting caught in the middle of it all. Emma had already disappeared upstairs, retreating without a word and leaving me to pick up the pieces. I knelt down and pulled both Oliver and Lily into a hug. "I'm sorry, guys," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of everything I couldn't say. "I promise I'm going to figure this out." But as the words left my mouth, I couldn't help but wonder, what the hell was I going to figure out? I couldn't even stand being in the same room as Emma anymore, let alone pretend everything was okay for the kids. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure what I wanted. To fight for my marriage? To walk away. Every option felt like losing. The kids didn't deserve this, none of it. But every time I thought about doing the right thing, about cutting ties with Sarah and trying to fix the mess with Emma, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Sarah had become my escape, my lifeline in the chaos. She was the one place where I felt some semblance of peace. Every time I was with her, the weight of my broken marriage slipped away, even if just for a moment. One night, as Sarah and I lay tangled together in bed, the guilt I'd been carrying finally spilled out. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "This isn't fair to them," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "To the kids. To you. To any of us. I don't know if I can keep doing this," I admitted, staring up at the ceiling as the weight of everything pressed down on me. "I feel like I'm losing everything." Sarah turned to face me, her expression soft but serious. "You're not losing anything, James. You're gaining your freedom," she said, her voice steady. Her words sounded simple, almost too simple. But nothing about this felt simple to me. I was playing with fire, and I knew it. Sooner or later, everything was going to burn. The truth was, I couldn't keep avoiding the inevitable. Dave was still a presence in my life, a dark cloud hanging over everything I did. His shadow loomed large, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the only way I'd ever get some kind of closure was to confront him directly. I needed to see the man who had destroyed my marriage face to face. I wasn't sure if it was for myself, for Emma, or for some misplaced sense of justice. Maybe I just wanted to knock him off his pedestal, to see him squirm under the weight of his own arrogance. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. I found out where he'd be, a public place, which felt fitting. I wanted witnesses. I wanted people to see the confrontation, to hear every word. If he wanted to play the part of the charming coworker, I wanted to shatter that image for good. I saw him before he noticed me. Dave stood by the fountain, glancing around like he was waiting for an old friend. Even in casual clothes, he oozed arrogance, the kind that made my skin crawl. Every movement, every gesture screamed self-assuredness, and it only fueled the anger building inside me. As I approached, his smile faltered when he finally spotted me. "James," he said, trying to sound casual, though the edge in his voice betrayed him. "Didn't expect to see you here. What's this about?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. I wasn't there for small talk. "You know well what this is about," I said, my voice low but steady, each word laced with restrained fury. People nearby started to glance in our direction, sensing the tension. I could feel their eyes on us, but I didn't care. Let them look. Let them hear. I wanted the whole world to see what kind of man Dave really was. "Look," Dave said, raising his hands defensively, his tone shifting into something that almost resembled sincerity. "Nothing happened. Emma and we were just talking. She was unhappy, and we—" "Don't," I growled, cutting him off mid-sentence. "I don't want to hear your excuses." Dave's confidence wavered, but only for a moment. His hands dropped to his sides, and he met my glare with an air of defiance. "I don't know what you think you know, James, but—" "Save it," I snapped, my voice rising slightly. "You think I don't know what's been going on? The lies, the sneaking around. Don't stand here and pretend you're innocent." He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. The words I'd been holding back for weeks, maybe months, came spilling out, each one sharper than the last. And for the first time, Dave looked uncomfortable. His smooth, rehearsed charm cracked under the weight of my anger. And that, at least, felt like a small victory. "I know what happened," I said, my voice calm but sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. My eyes locked on Dave's, unwavering. "I'm here because I want you to own up to it. No excuses. Look me in the eye and admit what you did." Dave's composure cracked. His gaze darted nervously, scanning the park as if hoping to find an escape route. But there was none, not here, not with me standing in his way. He shifted uncomfortably, the confidence I had imagined him having nowhere to be found. "Fine," he muttered under his breath. His voice wavered, small and hollow. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his shoulders slumping. "I never meant for it to get this far." "You didn't mean for it." My voice rose as the anger bubbled to the surface. "Well, it did, Dave. It got far enough to destroy my marriage, my family, and my trust. And now you're going to live with that." I didn't even notice the small crowd gathering nearby, drawn by the heated exchange. I didn't care who saw or heard. Let them. This wasn't a private pain anymore, it was raw, exposed for the world to witness. Before I could press him further, I caught sight of her. Emma stood at the edge of the park, her face pale, her expression a mix of shock and guilt. Her eyes locked on us, and it was clear she had been drawn here by instinct, maybe to stop the inevitable, though she was far too late for that. Tears welled in her eyes as she took a tentative step closer. "James," she began, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." Her words stopped me in my tracks. For a moment, I just stared at her, struggling to make sense of everything. "Then why?" I finally asked, my voice quiet but heavy. "Why did you do it?" Emma's breath hitched as the tears broke free. She buried her face in her hands, her words spilling out between sobs. "I don't know," she whispered. "I was lonely. I felt like you didn't see me anymore. You were always so busy, with work, with the kids, and I felt invisible. And then Dave, he made me feel like I mattered again." She looked at me, her face streaked with tears. "I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, James, don't leave. I can't do this without you." Her plea hung in the air like a weight, crushing and unrelenting. For a moment, I felt torn, between the love I once had for her and the betrayal that had replaced it. She was asking for something I wasn't sure I could give. Forgiveness. A second chance. But I wasn't that man anymore. Later that night, when the kids were asleep and the house was cloaked in uneasy silence, I confronted her for the last time. We stood in the living room, the air thick with everything we hadn't said. "We can fix this," Emma said, her voice shaking. "We can go to therapy. We can try again. Please, James." I shook my head, my decision already made. "No. It's over, Emma. I'm not doing this anymore, not for me, and not for you. I'm doing it for the kids. They deserve better than this. Better than us." Her knees buckled as she sank into a chair, her face crumpling under the weight of my words. She looked shattered, completely undone, but there was nothing I could do for her anymore. Not this time. I turned and walked out of the room, the sound of my heart pounding loud in my ears. When I reached the door, I saw Sarah waiting outside. She stood quietly, her presence steady and reassuring. She didn't speak, but her calm gaze said everything I needed to hear, that I wasn't alone, no matter how much it felt like I was. The days that followed were anything but easy. Nothing felt normal, but I focused on what mattered most, Oliver and Lily. I threw myself into being there for them in ways I hadn't before. We had movie nights, trips to the park, and long conversations before bed. For the first time in years, I felt present, truly present, for them. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave me a purpose, a reason to keep going. And that was enough, for now. I couldn't escape the guilt, no matter how much I tried. It tugged at me constantly, what Oliver and Lily were going through, the chaos Emma and I had dragged them into. But even with the guilt gnawing at me, I knew this was better than the toxic environment Emma and I had created. The tension, the fights, the lies, it was no way for them to grow up. As much as I tried to focus on the kids, I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. She had become such an integral part of my life, woven into the fabric of my days in a way I hadn't expected. But things had shifted between us. The clarity that came with the end of my marriage left an awkwardness hanging in the air, a quiet tension that hadn't been there before. One morning, we sat outside at a small cafe, sipping coffee. The silence between us felt heavy, like a third presence at the table. I finally broke it. "I've been thinking," I started, staring into my cup, avoiding her eyes. "About what comes next." Sarah looked at me, her gaze steady but searching. "Yeah," she said softly. "Me too." The truth was, things had gotten more complicated than I'd ever anticipated. What started as an escape, a way to take back some control in my life, had turned into something deeper. And now, with the dust beginning to settle, I realized how real it had become. But as much as I cared about Sarah, I wasn't sure I was ready to start something new. "Not yet." "I care about you," I admitted, my voice quiet. "Maybe more than I want to admit." I paused, struggling to find the right words. "But that doesn't mean I'm ready for this." Sarah's expression was calm, but I could see the sadness in her eyes. "I understand," she said, her tone steady but tinged with disappointment. "I didn't expect you to have all the answers right now. But I need to know, is this just about timing, or is it something more?" I didn't have a good answer for her. Maybe it was both. Maybe it was the guilt I felt about moving on too quickly. Or maybe it was the lingering uncertainty about what we had. Sarah had been my lifeline during some of the darkest moments of my life, but she deserved more than just being my escape. She deserved more than being part of my revenge or a crutch while I figured myself out. "I care about you, Sarah," I said again, this time meeting her eyes. "I really do. But I think we both know this wasn't built to last." She held my gaze for a long moment, her face softening into something bittersweet. "Yeah," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think you're right." The days that followed were quiet, introspective. I spent a lot of time reflecting on what we had shared, on how much it had meant in the moment but how unsustainable it truly was. Sarah and I had been brought together by circumstance, and while there was real care between us, it wasn't the foundation for something lasting. That realization, while painful, brought a strange kind of peace. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't shackled by the weight of a failing marriage or the guilt of an affair. I was free to focus on what truly mattered, healing and being there for my kids. One evening, as I sat on the couch with Oliver and Lily, watching a movie they'd picked, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of calm. I wasn't thinking about Emma, or Sarah, or the mess my life had become. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was just present. And that, I realized, was the first step toward truly moving forward.